Jess. Welcome back to my channel. I'm so happy you're here. And today we are going to continue our series of the many faces of industrial organizational psychologists with a special guest coming up soon in just a second. This guest in particular, I went through grad school. I went through my PhD program with her. She is great. She has a very unique journey, like all of the people that I hope to get on this channel have. It's just kind of by nature, but she's had a unique journey and into IO psychology, and she is just more of her authentic self. And I think it's important to just highlight all these amazing people that I have had the opportunity to get to know, both personally and professionally. So. Without further ado, please like and subscribe, and let's get into this video. I have here Maya Gan Boychek, correct, okay. Maya? Boychek. Okay. Yep. Okay, amazing. Oh. So today we're going to have Maya here to talk to us about her experience in IO psychology. This is a continuation of the other video in the sense of just grabbing other experiences, learning about other people in this field, and hopefully to draw some inspirations for yourself, and she can give her advice and give her input, and hopefully that helps you all as you go on in your careers and if you decide to join in with us IO psychologists. So I met Maya in 2018. She was actually my host for my interview. And I remember her giving me a lot of great encouragement, a lot of tips and tricks, and then just very overall supportive. And then when I did join in the program, we were in the same lab, so we actually sat together. We took a couple classes together, so we had the opportunity to get to know each other throughout our time in grad school, and it was really great. And she's doing amazing things, so I'm really happy that she was able to join in today. Thank you so much, Maya. And yeah, so I'm just gonna lend it over to you. Can you just tell me a bit about yourself? First of all, what are you up to, right? What are you doing now? And then we'll backtrack to just tell me, who are you, where you come from, and all that great stuff.
Sure, of course. So my name is Maya Dan Bochek. I'm an organizational development and training consultant for a smaller boutique firm that's based out of St. Louis. So I do a lot of organizational development stuff, training stuff, but I'm also a diversity, equity, inclusion expert, so I do a lot of work in that area as well. But truly, anything under the sun that IOs do, I'm also doing. So I've been working with my company for almost 3 years now. So I started as an intern, moved into a full consulting position, and so now I'm full-time consulting with just this one company. And so I do a lot of work with, of course, national to the U.S. Organizations, but we also work with a lot of international organizations as well. But anything from government, quasi-government, what is it called, corporate, for-profit, and then, of course, nonprofit as well. So I do it all, which means that I end up having to be aware of a lot of different industries all at once, but it ends up working out really well. So I am largely based in St. Louis. I was not born here. I was born in Croatia, and then as a child, a baby, I came over to the United States with my mom. But I have been in the St. Louis area for the majority of my life, and I love it here. So I don't know how soon I would be moving away from the St. Louis area, although if I go, I'm hoping to go somewhere much cooler, and certainly not...
Cooler?
Oh, yeah, the Midwest, it's not even so much the heat, it's the humidity and the heat. It's just terrible. It's no fun. But I'm also a little bit, I think, primed to say that, considering that we're going through a major heat wave at the moment. So
okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So my background whenever I was an undergrad was in psychology. I just got a degree in general psychology, bachelor's of science. And then I went to SLU to get both my master's and my PhD in IO Psych. And it's been one of the best decisions I've made for my life, and I've been able to learn a lot and meet a lot of people like Jess, and I'm so happy and grateful for the opportunity to talk to you all today.
So what sparked your interest into IO? How did you know, like, this is where I'm going to go? This is when you were in grad school doing, because I know when we're psychology majors, we get exposed to different branches of psychology. Mm-hmm. So what was that moment for you like?
Well, I think that honestly, I was very much not interested in the IO field whenever I was first pursuing psychology. I was thinking, man, I want to go into neuropsych, or
Oh.
even honestly, then I got kind of pushed into social psych, and I was like, nope, this is it. This is what I need to do with my life. And I was completely going for social psych for a very long time, which is probably why in a lot of my IO research I do more social psych topics as well. But then I met my first mentor, Dr. Nadler, at SIUE on the other side of the river, almost at St. Louis University. I feel like I'm stuck there, it seems like. But so I met him and I started working in his lab, and he's also an IO psych person with sort of a social aspect about some of his research. And so I learned that I could kind of do both. So I
Yeah.
didn't have to necessarily be a professor, but I could be a professor if I wanted to. And so I sort of got yanked from like clinical and neuropsych whenever I realized that it just wasn't really for me. And that I did not want to work with like people in a therapy capacity.
Yeah.
My mom's a therapist. I knew I never wanted to do like that sort of therapy, but I thought, oh, maybe I'll just focus on the brain and then I won't actually have to talk to people. But no, I ended up just moving completely a different direction, and I'm really happy that I did because it was certainly it was one of those things that like as I took more courses, I learned that I would probably be a better fit for IO psych.
Mhm.
So like as soon as I got into my stats classes in undergrad, I was like, oh, maybe I am actually good at math. Like maybe I
Yeah.
can do this. And so I would do like I would have a lot of enjoyment in stats. And so I was like, well, okay, what can I do with this? Like, where are some directions I could go? And I knew that IO Psych, that there's a big research focus, and stats is
Mhm.
like a big portion of it. But it's not like the only thing, of course. So if like you're not like super into stats, it's okay. They'll help you figure it out. Like you can definitely still go into IO without being interested in the stats, but it does help to at least have some interest in it because it's one of the most stats heavy fields. We're a STEM field.
Yeah.
We're officially recognized as a STEM field. It's so exciting. So
So
I
nice.
wanted to do
So
IO first.
true.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad you said that though, because a lot of people on my channel that come in, stats is the one that kind of deters people from coming into IO. And I'm like,
Sure.
just relax. We have really
Yeah.
great teachers who, if you're
Yes.
open to learning, they will teach you and you will learn it. So I'm really happy that you kind of echo those same thoughts. So thank you for saying
Oh
that.
yeah. Yeah, 100%. Like I know people who were never ever interested in stats at all, and they still went IO, and they're great consultants. They're great
Hmm.
professors. They can do everything that they need to. So definitely don't let that deter you from trying out IO Psych. Just be prepared to be a learner. I mean, that's gonna be true if you go into higher education, like period, right? So like,
Yeah.
just be ready to learn, and some things might be uncomfortable at first, and you might have a little bit of a learning curve, and that's okay. That's what you have your cohort for, right? So
Yeah.
I can't tell you how much I learned from my cohort and from other students in the other programs that were around me, and we had like study groups, and we would do
Mhm.
our homework together, and so we would learn all together. So truly, it's a good thing to be uncomfortable with something in grad school because at least you're surrounded by people who are also probably equally, if not more,
Yeah.
uncomfortable with the same topic and wanting to learn. So as long as you're willing to learn, you're good. You're good to go.
Yep. 100% agree with that. So Maya, I remember when I first met you, you were like, die hard, I'm going academia. And
I was.
now you are like, I don't want to do academia, or maybe you still are open to it, but you're doing more consulting work. So what shifted for you? What changed in that? And would you even go, would you consider going academia again?
That's a really good question. Yeah, so I was diehard academia at first, and then I think it was more just the general grad school experience sort of moved me away from it. The idea that like I'm already going to be working for 5, 6, 7 years just to sort of not even compete because it shouldn't be competitive. Although some
Mhm.
programs are competitive,
Yeah.
but ours wasn't, right? So the idea that I had to like prove myself for that long and then go into an academic setting and then do it all over again just to get
Yeah.
tenure really did not speak to me at the moment. Of course, whenever you go into consulting, you still have to prove yourself. There's no
Mhm.
time that you're going to have to enter into something and not have to prove yourself, even if you are the best at what you do. have the most experience. Everybody needs to see what your worth is,
Yeah.
beyond just you being able to talk about it. Although being able to talk about it is definitely a strength. Um, but so I did kind of move away from there. However, I have been open to the idea of going into academia at some point, although I don't think I would ever join a psych department. I
Okay.
have definitely looked into the idea of joining a B school, a business school.
Okay.
So I've been talking with my business school friends about like what does that look like, and so after some very candid talks with them, essentially what I've sort of thought about is if I'm going to do this, I might do it in like 5-10 years or something, right? Coming
Okay.
down the line because business schools really do like that experience that you could bring to the table as well.
Mhm.
And honestly, I really love consulting. Like even
Yeah.
whenever I was wanting to go academic, I always said I want to go academic so that way I could do consulting on the side, like my mentor Dr. Nather, like my mentor Dr. Harvey, right? Like
Yeah.
it was always the idea that I was going to do some consulting on the side because I didn't want my research, I didn't want my efforts to be just limited to academia, to um, journals that are not accessible to consultants, and so that's why
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of open science as well because I do think that consultants need that, and I think that they need to be able to, really be able to see that research, and it also be accessible to them language-wise and all this other stuff. So
Yeah.
um, maybe in the future I might go that direction. Honestly, going into like an academic position sounds like a pretty sick retirement plan. Like
Yeah.
really, like in my like 40s or 50s, I'd love to go back to academia full time and then just stay there for a while and continue my research. Although I'm still doing research, right? So
Yeah.
even though I'm in a consulting position, I'm still collaborating with other researchers and academics. So I'm still doing a lot of stuff to build up my CV, not necessarily for the purpose of building my CV, but
Mhm.
because I genuinely love research. And whenever you're consulting, there's not a whole lot of time for independent research, right? So I'm doing that on my own and working with some of my friends, which is very cool. That's the other great part about grad school is that you meet a bunch of people that you want to collaborate with. So
Yeah.
that's what I've been doing. So hopefully I'll have more publications coming out and have more research that I can work on with my friends.
Well, you said two main things here that I kind of want to dive into a little bit more. One is around going to business school versus psychology
Mm-hmm.
department, and then the other one is just what is your research interest and how did you get involved in that? I'll go with the first one because this is something in the that Rico in our last interview said he's
Mm-hmm.
actually prepping to get in to go for business school.
Yeah.
So he wants to go academia, he wants to go business school, and he's actually in his final year, he's just proposed his dissertation. So he's kind of like
Oh,
really,
wonderful.
really want to go that way. But what is your motivation for wanting to do business school versus psychology department? Like why that one?
Well, I think that there is a bit more of an investment into business schools. So there's quite a bit of resources that get given or that are given to business schools that are not necessarily given to psych departments, which is really unfortunate because I do love psych departments. I'd love to work
Yeah.
in one, but it's sort of a weird toss up of whether or not like your students are going to be able to get funding or if
Yeah.
you're going to be able to get funding. Sometimes grants also look at the school that you're within, and so in some grants they may favor business schools over psych departments. I also really was interested in the idea of training the world's new leaders, right? So
Yeah.
like as much as I love psych departments, especially IO psych, I know that there's going to be a very small portion of us that do get to go into like leadership positions, executive positions, where those guys that are working on MBAs, like all of them
Yeah.
are working on it, right? So that's where all of them want to go.
Yeah.
And so the idea of being able to sort of train the world's next leaders is really important to me. And also not even just the leaders, but also, um, you know, people who are going to make a huge difference in their
Yeah.
organizations. We've got a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, so I like the idea of also making things more accessible to a lot of different groups.
Mhm.
And so I do feel that my identity itself could also help encourage more people who look like me, who are from my same communities, to come to a business school as well, and hopefully make them feel more comfortable. So there's a few different aspects, and of course, we cannot ignore the big thing at the end of the day. business schools just pay way better than
Yeah.
psych departments, right? You often get paid for your publications, which is unheard of in psych.
Yeah.
You end up having, of course, those more resources that go towards a lot of your research. And of course, at the end of the day, you are going to get paid more, so there's more incentive to stay around. Um, I'm not always, I've never been like one that just goes directly for pay, but I'd be lying if I said if I go to school for 10 years that I don't want to get paid decently. Like,
Exactly.
that's a good thing for me. Plus, if I
Yeah.
go from a consulting position to an academic position, I'm going to want it to be at least comparable whenever it comes to pay. I don't want to have to change my
Yeah.
quality of life entirely just for a career change if I can avoid it. Although, of course, I might not be able to avoid it in all situations, so I'm also open to that.
Yeah, no, it's 100% understandable. We got to get paid. We got to survive. We have families, so yeah, that is
Exactly.
100% understandable. But I
Yeah.
really loved how you articulated, a part of your motivation being in the business school is around training the world's new leaders because you're right. A lot
Mhm.
of people who go on to be CEOs or even just in executive positions, they are starting in business schools. They're
Yeah.
going for their MBAs, majority
Yeah.
of them. And I never thought about it from that way. And I really like how you said that. And I think you'd be a really perfect person for it as well because your research interests, what those stand for, especially around, the work you've done around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also the research you've done, that could be a heavy influence on those young minds that will go on and do more around that. And they'll have that in the back of their head, like, oh, I remember
Mhm.
my teacher in business school told me this. And you'll be like,
Yeah.
it sticks with them. So I really love that. But speaking of that, what are your research interests? Like what is that? I mean, I know what it is, but the people
Yeah,
and
sure,
they
of
may have
course.
evolved since the last time I've talked to you. So yeah, what are they?
Yeah, for sure. So generally, my research interests are within the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Although specifically, I'm going through that using a specific lens. And so a lot of my research is based in the theory of planned behavior, which is a model that can be used to predict behavior really accurately with a high level of accuracy, which is really exciting. And so I really like using that model, not just for DEI work, but for a lot of different work. In fact, I sort of like tie it into a lot of the work that I do as a consultant anyway. And I know that Richard also does, our old mentor also does a lot of that with theory of planned behavior. And it's very cool in that sense. So I do a lot of organizational development stuff as well because I do believe in, especially now that I've been in the industry for a little while, about a sustainable change, and organizational development is going to be doing that. So, being able to show that there's these methods that you can use to substantially change your organization's culture and also the behaviors that follow within it, right? Because you can't change a culture without a change in behaviors from your employees. I love the idea of doing some research to figure out what really makes that work the best. And so far, the theory of planned behavior has been really helpful for me and also for my research. But honestly, I'm open to a lot of different areas of research. I also do quite a bit of training research. So that was what I ended up actually doing my dissertation with. I did the theory of planned behavior. I did DEI training specifically, and then of course training in general, best practices and that sort of thing. And so training is also just sort of an interesting thing to me too, because it's like one intervention that you can use amongst many. But if you do it well, it can really, again, stick with people. And maybe that kind of goes to my ties to academic, is that I really do like the idea of like informing people, giving people the knowledge that they need to engage in the behaviors that are not just expected of them, but are going to be the most advantageous for them. And so being able to see that in training as well is really important to me. I don't do a whole lot of research in like things like leadership or maybe some of those exciting areas of research, but I am also open to those. But I also do things like organizational attractiveness. So what makes an organization attractive to potential applicants and also keeps people around while they're in there. I have been sort of working into the wellness space a little bit, not as much as some of my colleagues, but certainly getting into there. But a lot of what I do is definitely rooted in diversity, equity, inclusion to any capacity, right? Like it's so broad, and I
Yeah.
really do touch every single bit of it. No identity is safe from my research. Like I'm ready to go into it. Like
What drove, I'm just curious, like from a more personal standpoint, but what drove your, interest in wanting to do more DEI research, right? Like, because that's kind of where it all started. What was it about you that you felt like I really want to like work on this more and then share the message out to people as well? Like, what
Yeah.
attracted you to that line of research?
Well, truthfully, my entire life has been kind of rooted in activism to some level. So, for instance, the reason why I was born in Croatia was because my mom was over there cleaning up after the war, so helping people doing humanitarian efforts, and that's how she met my dad, who was also interested in humanitarian efforts. And so, I actually had the pleasure of going back to Croatia earlier this month to see all of the volunteers who worked on these humanitarian efforts, and also did a little bit of pro bono humanitarian consulting too,
Nice.
which was very cool.
Yeah.
So a lot of my life has already been sort of rooted in some level of activism. As I grew up, I was always into, activism in that sense. Maybe it would be a protest if that was something that was accessible to me as a teenager, or
Yeah.
being able to help people out in whatever way I can. Also recognizing the differences in how people perceive the world and how the world perceives them. And I also have family members who have suffered from having their identity used against them in the workplace. And so I've seen firsthand the effects that, that can have on people. And so a lot of that sort of is an amalgamation to say that I wanted to see what I could do to improve people's lives. Especially on those aspects that they can't control about themselves, right? Some parts of their
Hmm.
core identity, their authentic selves, about them not having to hide themselves to be successful. And so all of this has sort of been rooted back to my beginnings, right? Like it's just
Yeah.
always been sort of a part of me. And so I didn't really know what I could do with that. I remember I think it was in seventh grade, and we had like a career quiz, and the teacher said, well, what do you want to be whenever you grow up or whatever? And I was like, I want to be an activist. And she was like, you
Yeah.
can't do that. That doesn't make any money. I'm like, I'm gonna prove you wrong. Like I'm gonna make money doing this. Like I will
Right.
make money doing this. And look at me now. I am.
Yeah.
But of course, I'm also not because I have to be more objective in my position. I um, try not to allow my desires for just pure activism to get into my consulting alone, of course, because I need to make sure that I'm doing it for the benefit of the organization I'm working with, my clients, not just for my own personal agendas.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that outside of work that I'm not still doing this. I'm still engaging in activism. I'm still doing, you know, humanitarian work. I'm starting to get into that a little bit more now that I realize how much my skills transfer over there.
Yeah.
I'm helping out with grants. I'm helping out with a lot of different stuff that can advance like sort of my own um, activism goals and things like that. And so it's a very long-winded story just to say that I felt like I was kind of born into it in a way. Like,
Yeah.
and of course, I've also got some personal pieces as well. I'm queer. I'm femme presenting. I have a partner that you know we very much appear that we're in a heterosexual relationship, but we're not, right? And so
Yeah.
I've got that piece with me. I don't really feel like my immigration status really has much of a bearing on my life, just because I've lived in America for so long. So not so much that, but also just growing up with a very diverse family with a lot of different nationalities, a lot of different races. I think that's also helped sort of guide me in that direction. But of course, everybody sort of has their own relationship with DEI,
Yeah.
and I was just very fortunate to start mine very early.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I love that. And I love, IO psychology is one of those fields where you can really marry both. And I think, you did say that sometimes you have to put it on the back burner because you don't want it to get in the way of organization interests. But normally organizations that are putting people first, right, that are really thinking about their people, it's gonna come naturally in that sense. It's not, you won't have
Exactly.
to, it might not be, you might not have the exaggerated effect that you may want, but you won't have to like worry that, oh, this is really gonna hurt, like really hurt their people and all,
Yeah.
really impact all of that. So I like that.
Yeah.
And I think IO, like I said, IO psychology is one of those fields where you can really make a difference through different
Hmm.
vehicles and the skills that you learn. And like you just said, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
and even then, like, I mean, so like the firm that I work with, we always talk about that DEI is like ingrained in our DE or in our DNA. Sorry,
Yeah.
DEI is ingrained in our DNA, and so even though like it's not necessarily an activism thing, because I know that activism can sort of be misconstrued as like a political stance and all this other
Yeah.
stuff, we do truly stand by DEI work. And as a result, every single consultant within our firm is also aligned with DEI values and making sure that that works for organizations, specifically within an organizational context, right? And with, around behaviors. Of course, we're not here to necessarily change people's beliefs or values, but we do want to make sure that they have the knowledge that they need to engage in the appropriate DEI behaviors, and of course, know what those behaviors are that are expected of them. So it's not really activism necessarily within a consulting context, but it does it does help me know that I'm making a difference that
Yeah.
is aligned with my values. And I mean, I'm very value driven in some ways. Like, I mean, I've decided to not work with certain consulting firms just because my values didn't align with them, and I've
Yeah.
as a result had to work in a tattoo shop just to make things get by
Yeah.
for a while in grad school, and that's okay with me, right? Like,
Mhm.
uh, but at the same time, it's not just my values; it's also just the right thing to do, right? So,
Yeah. You have to follow you have to stay true to thyself. So you have to follow your North Star. So I mean,
absolutely,
for
yeah,
anybody doing any type of work, when you get misaligned or when you don't have that, that's when chaos begins to happen. So 100% understand where you're
absolutely,
coming from.
yeah.
Just to kind of build, because we talked about, you talked about transferable skills and all those skills have allowed you to, move into more humanitarian efforts and help
Mm-hmm.
around that cause and all of that. Well, those causes.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, we do learn a lot of great skills in IO psychology. Like going through the programs, like we learn a lot of great skills that we can take everywhere. But what skills do you think that the programs fall short on? And I'll give an example just to kind of help think about it. When I went into corporate, right? First, number one, you go in from a learning environment to a corporation where you're thinking that you're still in that mindset that, oh, they understand that we are all learning here as well. So there's not going to be like harsh, penalties or harsh thoughts
Mm-hmm.
about somebody. So you go in it with that mindset first. And then the second thing is you have to learn to navigate the political realm, which I don't think, if I'm speaking for myself, because it was a learning space that I was in, and maybe I was just not paying attention to it, but because it was a learning space, I treated it as a learning space. So I didn't really treat things with politics, right? I just went
Mm-hmm.
there with how I felt. But going
Yeah.
here, now I'm working with people and I'm like, ooh, I gotta really watch how I'm gonna word this, how I'm gonna frame this. I spend sometimes an hour on an email just to make sure that it's going right. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing that I don't think I got as much out of our programs in IO Psych. Although I got a
Yeah.
lot of great things, I think that's one of the things that falls short. But for you, where do you think the programs didn't give us much perspective on? Or just something we
Yeah.
have to learn through experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I fully agree with you on the politics of things. I think that um, I don't even know if there's like a proper way to train in an IO program the politics that you have to navigate. And of course, while you're in an internal position, right, you have to navigate the politics of your entire organization, and it's like a
Mhm.
constant thing. I'm sort of on the other end of this. I do see the politics. I'm not as impacted by them personally.
Okay.
However, because there's so many different politics, so many different cultures that I have to work with, so I've got usually anywhere from like 12 to 15 clients, and they're all completely different, right?
Yeah.
So like there's certain things about the environment that you have to know going in. Like for instance, if we're doing DEI work, just for
Mhm.
instance, there's some organizations that we cannot call it DEI work, right?
Yeah.
You have to call it inclusion and belonging work, or some of them they use an entirely different acronym. They're DEIB
Yeah.
or DEAI, or maybe they just do D and I because the equity thing is just not quite ready for them yet, right? So
Yeah.
there's those politics that go in there. Of course, there's also I think especially whenever you work with like government and quasi-government, there's a different type of politics that's not just internal corporate and not corporate, but like company organizational politics, but also literal politics that
Yeah.
come in
Yeah.
from the outside
Yeah.
coming in. And I'm very fortunate to work with a firm that does a lot of government work and quasi-government work. So I got to learn how to do that coming in. I think that one thing I distinctly remember my CEO while we were doing a presentation one time with a client. Afterwards, she was just like, "You don't have that good of a poker face yet. We got to work on that." And I said, "Oh, you're right. You're completely right. I got a great poker face now. I can hear some of the most egregious stuff, and I can still just say,
Yeah.
kind of go on. And how do we work with this? How can we,
Yeah.
So there's different ways in which you have to deal with the politics that are coming in, and I don't think that grad school does prepare us for that, and I also don't know if they can really.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing there. Um, the other thing that I feel that IO programs, and I think that this is probably true for most IO programs, is that we don't get any background in employment law.
Mm.
None. At least
Okay.
not at St. Louis University. Like you get like enough to like be dangerous, like like sort of like the things that are like super illegal. But like because we're not HR, because a lot of people do think that we're HR, but we're not HR.
Hmm.
We don't get that employment law background. And if you're in the DEI space, there's civil rights stuff that's going on that's changing all the time. Even if you're not in the DEI space, there's other employee rights pieces and union pieces that need to be considered. And I didn't have any of that going in, right?
Okay.
And so I'm very fortunate that I have two HR consultants that are also on my
Yeah.
team, and so they can sort of guide me with that. But I expressed to my leadership, I said, this is something that I want to learn more about. And
Yeah.
my CEO heard me. Like, so now I go to a bunch of Hush Blackwell seminars on different employment law changes. Not that I'll ever be the one that has to provide legal advice, but if
Yeah.
I'm doing, say, a policy audit, I'm looking through their documentation, I can start to see, oh, is there something that's illegal here? What's going on? And then I can make
Yeah.
recommendations to say, hey, you need to take this back to your attorney and have them review this, right? And I think that that's helped me substantially, especially within the DEI space, just because there are a lot of civil rights changes. Just recently, the Supreme
Hmm.
Court in the United States did a lot of different things that are now impacting civil rights. And so
Yeah.
Hush Blackwell is on that. I am going to a seminar on Monday to learn more about
Yeah.
how that's going to affect employment law. And it's unfortunate that these things do change and sometimes not for the better.
Yeah.
But it just means that we have to be more creative, right? And so
Yeah.
that's the part that I do enjoy about knowing employment law is that I'm sort of more prepared for things that we cannot do or that we can
Yeah.
do, things that we need to be considering. And then if, for whatever reason, I mean, like we've got Florida that's saying you can't do any DEI work at all, right? So,
Florida
okay,
is Florida
yeah,
is a whole nother Florida and Texas. I don't know what's going on with both. Well, I don't
yeah.
know what's in the water there, but it's something going on.
I don't know. Maybe the sun it gets or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe it is. It's
But
too it's too sunny for y'all out there. Getting delusional, you
maybe like
know?
it's one of those things like it's happening all the time.
Yeah.
People's rights are being stripped away. The trans community especially is under fire at the moment, and so how do you navigate that? How do you work with this? How can you help people if it's not necessarily always in their neighborhood? How can we help them feel comfortable, open, safe at work, right? How do you do that? And if there are laws that prevent you from doing certain things, okay, let's
Yeah.
get creative. How do we
Yeah.
still do this using different language, right? Maybe we don't
Hmm.
call it PI. Maybe we call it belonging. Maybe we
Yeah.
bring it back to EEO because you can't get rid of EEO, right? Like that's what it has to come down to sometimes. And so our firm we don't do entirely DEI work, but I'm giving
Yeah.
DEI work as an example, not just because it's my own personal interest. Um, we only do maybe 40, 50% DEI work, although we do have a lot of it,
That's
right?
still a
So
good amount.
um,
That's still a good amount of work with
yeah,
DEI
it
work.
is.
Yeah.
It's getting lower, of course, because people
Oh,
are
okay.
starting to move away
Yeah.
from DEI work, but we do everything, so it doesn't really matter,
Yeah.
which is great. But it's sort of it's just one of those things that you have to navigate. It's conversations that we're having all the time, and that is a huge benefit of being an IO is that you do know how to do the research to figure out, okay, what are these trends that are happening? What's
Yeah.
the what does academia think about this? What are other consultants doing? What sort of published research is there out there that is working for other things that do the same thing? So we've got a lot of methods to do that. But I do think that employment law, I think that we would benefit a lot, even if it was just a simple like, hey, yeah, grad students, you're going to the law school for a brown bag on employment law, right? Just for the state, even to figure
Yeah.
out, even, oh, this actually can impact the things that I do. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Or like whenever you move, like for instance, you moving internationally, giving you some background on the employment law that's going to affect where you're
Mhm.
local to. And so, because laws are different everywhere, everything
Yeah.
changes,
They are
right?
so
And
different.
people have different rights as employees and people in a lot of different places, and I think that can be really helpful. Um, and I guess the only other thing that I think that it's more specific to our program, just because we didn't have any professors that really taught this, was leadership stuff. I
Hmm.
don't have a whole lot of background in leadership research, or um, I've got enough to essentially like be dangerous, right? Like from the
Hmm.
OD stuff. But I had never had a proper leadership course, right? I don't
Yeah.
know the things that make a good leader, or I didn't, right? And with all of these, I need to always add the caveat that I didn't learn this in grad school, but I learned it in practice, right?
Yeah.
I got to learn all of these things. It was
Yeah.
like any shortcomings I had, that I was aware of or that I wasn't aware of, right? Um, it was fine because my firm was like, yeah, we get it. We can't have
Yeah.
everything, so let's get you that experience. If you're with a company, whether you're an external consultant, an internal consultant, working in corporate, whatever, if you have leadership that believes in you, that is willing to develop you, anything that you miss in grad school, you will get eventually, right?
Yeah.
I think that's true for academia as well, but I think that academia can also be its own bubble, right?
Yeah.
So you're only really exposed to the research that your colleagues are into, and
Yeah.
that colleagues that you know are into. Maybe they're not necessarily within your bubble, but you can see it outside of there. And so I feel like that can be a bit limiting sometimes, where um, out in practice, I mean, you're getting hit left and right with the realities of the real world, right? That some of these things in research just don't work, right? That they
No.
cannot be implemented. That,
No.
yeah, like this would be great in an ideal world, but nobody's going to listen to that.
No.
Nobody's going to do that, right? So how can we take that and make it amenable to actually work for people?
Yeah.
And so I think that in practice, um, you get to be creative. You get to figure out different ways to approach different things. And as long as you're still being aware and taking the time and doing your due diligence to keep up with research, whether that's visiting SIOP every year or just, having your Google alerts on certain topics or whatever, having friends within the academic space, as long as you're doing your due diligence there, you're going to be just fine, right?
Yeah.
Anything that you don't learn in grad school, I promise you, they will teach you, right?
Yeah.
You're going to learn today. Like you really
Yeah.
are. 'Cause it's going to be
Yeah.
one of those things that if you don't, you're just not going to be successful, right?
Hmm.
And as long as you are sticking to your gut on what you feel comfortable doing, that's really what matters there.
Yeah. 100%. I had a thought on what you just said regarding the learning the legal, constraints
Yeah.
that we work in or how employment law impacts our work.
Mm-hmm.
That may be a difference between a PhD and a master's program because in our master's program, we
Mm-hmm.
did have like, it wasn't like a full course dedicated to, but a good amount of our time in one course was dedicated to employment law, learning a little
Yeah.
bit more about civil rights, how that's impacted, and going like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was like a full on session dedicated to that. So that may be because, in master's, they're training to go applied only. So that may be a difference
Yeah.
there versus in PhD. I mean, that's not to say all master's programs are like that, but I know mine certainly was. So that may just be where the
Oh
difference
yeah.
is there.
Certainly,
Um,
I completely agree with that because if you're going to have to go into practice immediately after you're done with your program, you do need to be aware of those things. So I think
yeah.
you're right. I think that, and maybe it's not true for all PhD programs as well, but I know that I've talked to a lot of other PhDs who did not have this background and it was sort of a culture shock going into practice
Yeah.
wherever they were going because they were just like, I don't really know
Yeah.
this. This is why we got HR, right? I'm like, no,
Right.
no, believe me, HR is fantastic. They're wonderful. I can never do what they do. I never want to do what they do. But I still got to be aware of some of it, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
but
we
I think
do.
you're right. I think you're right because there's the chance that you're not going to go into practice that,
Mm.
you may not need it or maybe perceive that you don't need it in research. Although I think that
Yeah.
being aware of employment law and like unions and stuff like that would be
Yeah.
really helpful for
I
researchers.
think no, I agree. I mean, I think if I think about union, like I didn't get that in either program. I mean,
Mm.
we talked about it a bit, but we never had a full on like session dedicated to, okay, how do unions impact your work? And
Yeah.
I'll give you an example, like, and we're going to work through something. How would you
Mm.
navigate this? Like, so yeah, I agree with you on that part 100%.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember the only thing I learned about unions in our program was I was in a training course, and the professor said, "All right, and then you have to figure out if there's a union, and if there's a union, you jump ship." And then I said, "Okay, cool, that's great." Or they were like, "Well, no, you don't really do that. You have to put them on the liaison team and hope that
yeah,
everything is compliant with them." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, that does sound like a pain, right?" But
yeah,
realistically, I mean, yeah, it is hard to work with unions, but there's a reason why unions exist, right? They're there to ensure their workers' rights and everything like that, so they're valuable.
yeah,
You just have to learn how to navigate them, and I think that that probably comes with experience too. The more that you work with
yeah,
them, the more that it'll make sense as you go forward.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and just again, like with your leadership one as well, which you just talked about leadership, I think like building upon that, not just learning what a good leader is, but how do we build our own leadership presence when we go into these? I mean, I understand like you'll get that as time goes on, but just even having a bit of exposure, like what does that look like? How does that feel? How do you prepare for that now, knowing that, especially, I mean, at least in our program, I know a majority of us end up going into applied work. I think it's like
Mm-hmm.
60% of us. So like that would have been good, like how do I show
Yeah.
up? But I do think you get that through experience, some of the consulting experiences that we did, but yeah,
Yeah.
maybe a more formal session around that would have been cool.
I agree. Yeah, no, I, in a weird way, I am doing leadership training now,
Yeah.
right? Like, I have to be able to do these things as part of my job, and so part of that was getting the training myself, right? So I
Yeah.
got to learn, like what we provide in the training. I got to figure out some other stuff with that. I got to do some research, and I'm so fortunate to work for a firm that actually does value research and
Yeah.
research and development, that sort of thing, redevelopment of programs. So I got to learn a lot about that and learn from my supervisor and um, also just like how do we be leaders. I love what you said with that too because um, I don't know if every applied person wants to do this, but I know I want to be a leader one day. Like I
Yeah.
want to be like a high level leader. I want to have a lot of a lot of impact on whatever client I'm working with or whatever company I'm working for, whatever. Um, and I think that, yeah, I think you're right. A lot of that does come with time. But at the same time, find an organization that's willing to develop you. I'm going through leadership development right now, right? So, like just learning how to be a good leader, how to be a good supervisor, how to be a good manager. I always talk to my friends who have been doing like they've worked in like say retail or food service for like the entire time that I've been in grad school, and I'm like, you guys are so like they're always like, oh, I wish I had the dedication go to. I'm like, I have
Yeah.
absolutely no management experience, no supervisory experience. My
Yeah.
workforce experience is limited, right? Like I've got friends who have been managing for years and years and years, like truly like almost a decade, if not longer, and they're wonderful leaders, right? And I could
Yeah.
learn so much from them, and that's I mean, it just depends on where you go. I think that a lot of people can look at someone with a PhD and think, oh, they're just, you know, so dedicated to school, or like some people can perceive you as like super smart and others. I'm like, yeah, I am smart, but that doesn't mean that you're not smart, right? Like,
Yeah. We just took
right?
a
Like,
different
yeah,
path, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Luke always talks about like my partner Luke is always like, oh yeah, she's the brains or whatever, and I'm like, no, like the things that you do, I am quite literally incapable of doing. Like
Yeah.
manual labor of any kind is like an
Not.
insane cool thing that I wish I could do, that I had the physical ability to do, and the way that he thinks that
Yeah.
fits things, I can't do that, right? So I think that, there's a lot of different career paths that you can go in, and I hope that people don't think that you have to be getting your PhD just to be perceived as smart, because you can be
Yeah.
smart in a lot of different fields, right? So um, that's always what I tell a lot of my friends, because I'm truly like one of the only ones in my non-PhD friend group with a PhD, right? So um,
Yeah.
it is what it is. Yeah.
100% agree with you. And I think good leaders recognize that you are not the best at themselves are not the best at everything. Surround themselves with people who are good at what they do, right? So,
Exactly. Yes,
yeah, got
absolutely.
that. So, Maya, coming into, your type of role, like somebody who's coming fresh out of grad school, from a range perspective, how much salary could someone expect from there? Not a specific target, but if
Mm-hmm.
you're thinking about going in to do something in consulting, in a startup, what's the range people can expect?
Oh, that's a good question. So I really so SIOP provides an income and employment report every year, and I love that report. It's
Yeah.
really good for benchmarking. It's really good for, negotiating for your salary and everything. I think that
Yeah.
it's going to depend on what sort of consulting that you want to do. So, for instance, I did speak to external consulting. However, I can only really personally speak to boutique firm, right? So we're a
Mhm.
smaller firm. We're not a startup, but we've been around for, almost 25 years at this point. But we're still smaller, right? Like there's
Yeah.
a limited number of consultants. We could work with a lot of different clients of a lot of different sizes. But whenever you do work for a smaller consulting firm, of course, there's going to be less clients that you can bring in. So it's not like a Deloitte or a McKinsey
Mhm.
where they can take over hundreds and hundreds and
Yeah.
hundreds of clients, right? So as a result, whenever you work for smaller firms, there is a chance that you are going to get paid less than what you would get at a bigger consulting firm. So,
Mhm.
like for instance, a bigger consulting firm, you might be able to start at like say 85, 95. You might be able to, break six figures pretty quickly, like within the first few years.
Yeah.
Smaller boutique firm, it's going to take longer, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have a lower salary. You're definitely still going to make more than you would make in academia, right?
Yeah.
But you are going to make a little bit less just because there's not the capacity to bring in as much work, and so you have to be comfortable with that, right?
Mhm.
For a while, I was sort of like, I should be getting paid more or whatever,
Yeah.
like whenever I first started. But um, my firm is incredibly competitive whenever it comes to boutique firms, right? So like I'm getting paid better than a lot of boutique firms in the area, and I also get the other benefits of working with a boutique firm.
Yeah.
So working with a big, I don't want to say like a corporate firm, but it sort of is. Like you've
Mhm.
got, I might be one of two IOs on my team, but you might be one of 1,500 IOs
Yeah.
on one of those other teams, right?
Mhm.
And so the difference with that is that whenever you do work for those bigger firms, you don't get to see the whole process whenever it comes to consulting, right? So you don't get to see like what maybe you might get to see a portion of the process, like you might be in charge of just the training or just the surveys, or maybe you do get to lead a whole project, but you still might not get to see all the contracting that's involved, the
Yeah.
interviews that get you into there. You might not even get to see the end goal of
Mhm.
the project. You might not get to be part of that presentation, or you might not get to consult with the client afterwards after you've presented results. We're working in a boutique firm. I see it all.
Yeah.
I see literally everything. There's nothing that like I mean we don't have like I could see all the contracts for all of our work, right? I could see exactly how much that we're getting paid. I know how much we're getting paid because often I'm creating the statements of work for
Yeah.
some of these clients. I'm creating a lot of the proposals for the clients or potential clients. So I get to see so much more of that, and I also love my job because I'm able to do. I have more autonomy in what I do,
Mhm.
right? I get a lot of experience. I'm able to build up to my experience a lot quicker than I would be in a larger consulting firm. So even though I'm making a little bit less, and not by much, like I'm not making like a whole lot less, but I am making a little bit less than what I would have made if I would have gone to like a Deloitte. Um,
Mhm.
I'm getting so much more in different ways, right? So like I get to be home, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of the time. I do travel for about 30 or 40% of my job, right? Like about every 2 weeks I'm traveling for work.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's rarely for the entire week. It's usually only for like half a week, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I still get to come home and be in my home with my family,
Yeah.
right? So that's a big thing too. And I'm not like family driven in the way that I've got like children that I have to take care of or anything, but I do have a partner. I've got dogs. I want to be home with them.
Yeah.
And so I want to be home to some capacity, which in those bigger firms, a lot of times you're traveling 5 days out of the week, and it's every single week. I've got
Yeah.
some friends who are working in those positions, and they are stressed. They're burnt out. They're making six figures. They're making good money, but they have no time to spend it, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, they've got this big house that they're never in, right? Like, so
Yeah.
it's wonderful in some ways, and it just depends on your priorities, what you're willing to work with, and what you're not willing to work with, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times, whenever you do start in these positions, you'll start in internship positions. Typically, internship positions are going to be hourly, so they might pay you usually like a range of like 25 to 35 for a lot of
Mhm.
positions, which isn't bad, right? It's
Yeah.
certainly you definitely want like maybe a partner or a roommate or something
Yeah.
that you can share a place with. It's not the best
Yeah.
for how expensive everything is now, but I mean, even though I am making a little bit less than some of my friends at those larger consulting firms, I'm comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm able to afford everything that I want, right? Maybe I have to save up one extra paycheck if I want to have like a really, really big
Yeah.
spending thing, like if I want to like take a big trip or if I
Yeah.
want like a really nice thing or something. Um, but it's not that big of a deal, right?
No.
Like
Yeah.
it's okay, right? And so it's I'm comfortable with what I make. I know that there's opportunities for advancement, and that's the other benefit about working in a boutique firm is that you advance really quickly, right?
Hmm.
Like those bigger firms, you may never see the light of senior consultancy
Yeah.
ever. I'm already looking at it.
Yeah.
I've been built into this position to take over my supervisor's position with, which is a senior consultancy position. So like you can become a senior consultant a lot quicker in a boutique firm, or if it's not necessarily possible because there's not all boutique firms are the exact same, there is opportunities for more development, right? So because you do get all this experience, you've got a lot more on your resume, right? So
Yeah.
if you can't advance in one boutique firm, I guarantee you there's another boutique firm that will want you. And if you ever want to go to those big consulting firms, you're getting so much more experience. That way you don't have to do, I always call it like the penance that you have to have,
Yeah.
like whenever you go in, like you just get worked till you're raw, right? In a
Yeah.
lot of these firms. And so sometimes you can kind of skip out on that, right? I've seen some people
Hmm.
who have gone from boutique firms, be a senior consultant for a few years, and then they become a senior consultant in one of these bigger firms, and they're making tons of money, right? And they don't have
Hmm.
to do all the busy work that the entry level consultants have. So,
Right.
so
It's a
it's,
payoff.
yeah, exactly. So it's
Balance.
sort of like, do you want to play the long game with it and learn more from your job, or do you want to make a lot of money doing it? Neither answer is wrong, right?
Yeah.
I just chose the boutique direction. So yeah.
And it's nothing, like you said, it's just all about where you are in life and what you
Mm-hmm.
want, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
if you want a more comfortable life, you're not looking to have all that extra stuff, like it's fine. And then also, I
Yeah.
think where you live has a big influence on that as well. So if you
Oh,
live in
huge. Yeah.
more larger cities, your starting salary coming in, even at a boutique, might be larger than a smaller city such as St. Louis coming in. So
Exactly.
um, do keep that in mind as you all make your decisions. If salary
Yeah.
is a key driver, which there's nothing wrong with that, but just keep that in mind. Where you are makes a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that, I'd like to also say that salary is relative. Yeah, you're completely
Yeah.
right. I'm talking about in the St. Louis area. St.
Mhm.
Louis area cost of living is pretty low, right?
Yeah.
But I've got friends who work in San Francisco. They make a ton of money, except for if you do really a conversion, they're making less than what I am, right? And
Yeah.
they're working for these big corporations, these big tech corporations, right? So like, it's a balance on where you live, and I always like to say that like salary is really subjective in that sense because the amount that you're going to have to pay just to survive and where you're at is going to be so drastically different. So,
Yeah.
even if you're making $200,000 somewhere, uh, it might only feel like you're making 40,000 in some
Yeah.
cases, right? So, definitely keep in mind what the cost of living is for a lot of these places, because even like the SIOP report, it doesn't like it shows you some of
Yeah.
where people live, But if you want a very honest way of like, I think it is a little elevated. Truly, I think that people
Yeah.
who are much more comfortable with their
People,
salary
yeah.
are probably going to report more.
Yeah.
But of course, that is a good benchmark still to
Yeah.
see, if I go into this, what will I make, or what's the range, right? Like usually it's like what's the top of the range for I think for the SIOP reports, because I know a lot of consultants who work in a lot of these positions and they don't make what the SIOP report is saying that they make, right? Um, but
Maybe they're not the ones filling it out. Maybe it's the ones who are
yeah,
making the most. If we're
that's
looking
what
at it
I'm saying.
optimistically,
Yes,
people aren't lying. There is just other
yeah,
certain people are filling it out.
absolutely, yeah. The beauty of knowing data, right? So like you kind of figure that one out, and I think that they even address that in the SIOP report. But I think the SIOP report says that consultants that are working for, I think it's like less than 5 years in their position, like they're just out of, or I think it's less than 2 years or something, should be making like 70 to 80,000 a year, I think is what they say. But
Mm.
again, that's completely dependent on where you live. It depends on the type of firm that you go with, and it's not very clear who
Yeah.
falls within that. And they do try, but of course, whenever you only have like 500 people responding to a survey, how can you really know?
Yeah.
But even if it's elevated, great use for benchmarking. You to be like, look
Yeah.
at this report,
Yeah.
right? They don't have to know that that's elevated. Yeah,
Yeah.
get that back. Like, get the money that you deserve,
You
right?
know what?
So,
That's a really good point, Maya. You know what? Everyone who fills out the PSYOP report, just elevate so we can fight harder for higher
yeah.
salaries.
Yep, I agree. Let's
Just
do
kidding.
it.
Don't do that. Please don't do that. Let's be let's be ethical. Lead with integrity. But that is
Well,
a good point. That is a good point. I like that.
we
Um,
can be as ethical as the corporations want to be, and if the corporations don't want to increase pay based on cost of living increases, that's on
yeah,
them.
yeah,
We can play
fair.
that's their game.
Well, Maya, you have been really great. I just have one final question for you.
Sure.
What is your advice for current, incoming, and aspiring IO psychologists? What would you say to them?
Hmm. If you're at the undergrad level, get some lab work in, get some lab experience. Even if it's a lab that you're not super interested in yet, like because you're limited on the amount of labs that you can get into, take it. At least get
Yeah.
some of that experience. That way you can get into whatever grad school that you want. That way you can get assistantships and stuff. I also say don't settle for a program that does not pay you or that will not pay your tuition,
Hmm.
right? That's we don't need to be going into more debt, right?
Yeah.
We don't need to. Student loan debt is just insanely large, right? And of course, there's certain programs, and like I think master's programs, you will have to take out loans more frequently than PhD programs, and if that means that you gotta be poor for a couple more years and go to a PhD program just so that way you're not $100,000 in debt,
Yeah.
I say do it, right? Like,
Yeah.
especially if like you're still in your 20s, you got plenty of time to advance. And even if you're older and you're going into a lot of these programs, still do not put yourself in that position. It's not good. The United States does not have a good loan payoff system.
No.
But if you are willing to take some loans, go work in Europe. Like there's a lot of places that will cap you at a certain point after you've paid your student loans. My brother, he's got some student loans. I think that he was saying that like he doesn't have to pay all of, or like it's depending on his income and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And, really beneficial. And so believe me, there's better places to get a degree in IO if you don't want to stay in the United States. Jess learned. Jess is out of there. Jess is back in Europe. You got this. So yeah, I think that's some advice, but also just be willing to like learn, right? Like there were a lot of things that I felt very strongly against whenever it came to IO. Like for instance, I was very anti-coaching for a very long time because I felt like it was too close to therapy. But it turns out that I've just been given a lot of examples of the wrong way to do coaching. Now I'm getting developed on how to coach properly, doing proper
Yeah.
ways and other stuff like that. That is not therapy. That does rely on other resources and all these other best practices around it. But just be willing to learn and have an open mind whenever it comes to those things and try out new things. You might find that you're really into certain types of research or different industries that you would never imagine. I never thought I would really like working with government, but I do really like working with government. Right? Like it's a weird one, right?
Yeah.
And it's just fun to work with. But um, be excited about that. Be willing to be creative and be willing to learn.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, I think that's my advice.
Amazing. Well, that's great advice. Thank you, Maya, for joining in. Thank you for sharing your experience, where we got to learn a lot more about you and your advice and just your journey to IO Psych. I think this has been really great stuff. If you all ever want to contact Maya, you can see her LinkedIn profile below. Feel free to reach out. She's a great person to get to know, and I'm sure, as you saw in this interview, she'll give you some good advice if that's what you're seeking. So, thank you again, Maya, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.